Okay, and here we are on numero dos over here. And today, this one, we're going to be talking about acquiring language. How do we learn language? Okay, and we're going to start with the first one, which is what's called the language acquisition device, LAD. And you will see it just like that. And the guy that started this whole thing his name was Noam Chomsky. Definitely a guy very, very important in this whole entire thing. And it's really easy to remember, at least the way I remember, is chomp, like chomping, mouth. He has to do with language, so forth. So, language acquisition device means that people have an inborn capacity to learn language. So make sure to write that down, pause, rewind, do whatever you want, but don't put me on 2.0, okay? So basically, we're born with it. And this guy, Noam Chomsky, he was a linguistic person that did studies on on language, okay? And he basically said that humans are born to learn language, right? We have the capacity, our brains are wired that way. So this guy is definitely a biological approach. Might want to I include that in there as well. And he is also going to be the evolutionary as well. So kind of like biological and evolutionary. Okay, it's getting a little late, so my words start getting mixed up. Okay, next one is going to be statistical learning. So statistical learning is basically that, writing this down, babies are able to determine, so super cool. So babies are able to determine where the breaks and pauses are in speech. Okay, and even what syllables goes with other syllables. So we are, we learn it without even somebody telling us how to do that. The next one is also under statistical learning. You're going to include that they're able to extract the structure of language and then determine its pattern. So this is why you see babies, like when they talk, as they're learning to talk, they literally use a noun and a verb, right? So it's, or a verb and a noun, right? So that they're able to tell you. So it's very cool how they're able to do it without nobody teaching directly. Okay. Um, Now, as we get older, this is why it's harder for adults to learn a new language, because since we're not learning it in like parts like babies do, like in breaks and pauses, we're learning it as a whole, like trying to that gestalt approach. We want to put it all together. So it's harder to kind of break them apart again. There's still a lot of research on this whole statistical learning and how is it that we have this, how we're able to do this. But what they're basically saying is, or what they found is that the environment, as long as there's an environmental stimuli for the brain, it will learn language, okay? Which goes into the behavioral approach to language, okay? And our boy, B.F. Skinner, he is going to be the Mac Daddy of behaviorism. He's kind of like the guy that started it all. You'll see his name a bunch of times. Really famous guy, definitely need to know these two names, quite famous when it comes to psychology. So B.F. Skinner, he is the guru of behaviorism, and he basically said that children learn language through, and we're writing this down, through association, imitation, and modeling, okay? As well as, the next little bullet is going to be through conditioning and observational learning, okay? So association, right? Writing this down as well. Association is the way that they learn association in language is by seeing, hearing, and then making those connections to the words and actions, right? So they're hearing, okay, these are the words, like, oh, let me go get water. And as I'm going and getting the water bottle, right? They start making those associations. The next one is the imitation of sounds. When they imitate sounds, they're basically modeling and imitating. And I always think of the example is, if you guys seen that video of that kid that he was like, but listen, Linda, right? And he's literally talking, and it's funny because he's talking like an adult. But you better guarantee that somebody in the house talks to Linda just like that. And this kid has is modeling that conversation that has been happening with Linda. We all need to have a conversation with Linda because nobody should be telling her all of that, talking to her like that. But anyway, um, so that's the imitation of sounds. And then, of course, there's always that reinforcement of certain responses, right? So, like those kids that curse and everybody's laughing, guess what? They're going to curse again because everybody's laughing. They're going to be like, oh, this is funny. I got to say it again, right? Until they get in trouble. And then they're like, oh, wait a minute. Let me not say it again, right? So, that's that behavioral approach to language. And then the last, well, almost last little section is going to be cognition and language. And this is the cognitive approach to language. And it starts with linguistic determinism. So write that down. And linguistic determinism is basically that language shapes the person's ideas and thoughts. Okay, so according to them, they believe linguistic has to do with language. Language determines your thoughts. This is a way to remember it. So you might want to write that down. Your language determines thought. So basically, what they're saying is that depending on the language that's around us is how it's going to dictate the way that we speak to each other. So, for example, if you are in an environment, right, you're exposed to an environment, you learn words like really negative, like, oh, this sucks, like all these like negative words, then you're going to tend to also speak quite negative, but as well as your thoughts, if those are the words that are being used, right? And this is why I always say, like that example of telling yourself certain words. So, if I'm feeling, super anxious or nervous, right? I tell students, I'm like, instead of saying you're nervous, tell yourself that you are excited, right? I'm excited, I'm ready, right? It's replacing another emotion, but it's just even the thought of it, just saying those words does affect the way that you think, right? The next one is going to be so a good thing to know about linguistic determinism is the more language you have, the more it can help with your thoughts and the way you think. Okay, linguistic relativity is that language and thought influence each other. So it's basically how language is relative to your thoughts. Okay, so it kind of just goes hand in hand. But it doesn't say that language determines thought, right? So linguistic determinism is language determines thought. But linguistic relativity is that they're basically related to each other. Language and your thoughts work together um, hand in hand. Okay, there's still a lot of research out there, and they're still looking at the effect of culture because they definitely say that their culture and the words that are used within a culture definitely affects the way we think, um, as well as people that are bilingual. They actually say that there's a lot of research behind bilingual. We'll talk a little bit more about that in our hardness. Is it actually is an advantage for those people that are bilingual, both cognitively and socially, because they have more words. So I don't know if it happens to you guys. I'm bilingual. I literally speak Miami, if that's even a thing. And we actually have a dialect here, which is Spanglish, right here in South Florida. And definitely there are just some words in Spanish. Though I feel very comfortable more in English than in Spanish, but there are certain words in Spanish that I just have to say them in Spanish, right? And I think that's why I speak Spanglish because there's just some words that just go better in Spanish. And definitely it just has more, people that are bilingual, they just have an exposure of more phrases, words. So being bilingual is very good thing. Okay. And the last part is your brain and language. So there are two parts of our brain that you guys need to know. And we'll talk a little bit more when we get to Unit 2 when we talk about the brain. But here's the little seed for language because it will be on your test. And it's basically the first section in your brain that deals with language is Broca. And the guy that started this, guess what is his name? Paul Broca. And this one is this controls your language expression and which is, so we're writing that down, language expression by movement. So this is all about your muscle movement when speaking, okay? And for this one, it's the frontal lobe area. Okay, frontal lobe is where the Broca area is at. And actually, frontal lobe has a lot to do with movement as well. So it just makes sense. Now, somebody that has a Broca area damage, and you need to know this, the damage is they have a hard time speaking, but they understand what you're saying and they know what to say. So it's very frustrating because though they cannot verbally, like physically move their muscles to say it or to like make the sound of certain words, they do understand what you are saying to them. Okay. Now, unlike the Wernicke's area, this is um, language comprehension and expression. Or, yeah, and it's kind of, they're both the language expression. But this one has to do with comprehension. So for this one, the muscle is not impaired. They're able to speak words, they're able to say sounds. However, when they speak to you, it does not make sense because they do not comprehend how, like, the language that is being spoken to them. So, for instance, if I ask somebody with a Wernicke's area damaged, and I ask them, "How are you?" They may start talking about the water bottle is yellow and this and that, and they'll start talking. It just doesn't make sense. It's a bunch of words together, and it doesn't make sense. Oh, my pen over here is flying all over the place. Okay, so physically they can speak. They have no problem with the muscle. This one is all about comprehension, is they just don't understand. So when they speak to you, it just will not make sense. And that is it for this one. And we are done for today. Yay.